January 31st, 1984. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Mr. Joe Barber.
Now, generally, a lot of times I put that governor in parentheses, you know. Joe, you know, Governor
Yeah.
Joe, J.H.
How come they call you governor?
Well, I ran for governor twice, see.
Yeah.
I was second man in the primary in 1954 as a Republican, and then I ran as a Democrat in 1958, so I'm the only guy that ever ran on both tickets for governor.
Huh. Hey, Mr. Barber, where were you born?
I was born at Fort Smith,
Fort Smith. When's your birthday?
February 6, 1915. And they say, sometimes in a joking way, they say that I just escaped the hanging judge.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a legend that I've heard, and of course many other people probably don't know anything about it, but see, Fort Smith was one time called Christmas Town. Christmas Town for the reason that you see, just like nowadays, only just 3 or 4 years ago, when about the last year Carter was in office as president, he went down to Plains, Georgia, and the television crews were down there, you know, covering that, and so they said, now don't pay attention to those that sound like shots in the distance. Said, that's not them. After the president said, that's the kids shooting fireworks down, and this was Christmas, see? Yeah. So, in other words, when the troops came in there to establish that fort in 1817, it was in the Christmas season, see? Yeah. And of course, you know, around the military installation, you have that evening gun business, you know, where they retreat and so on and so forth, and so it was fireworks, see what I mean? Yeah. So the Indians, and of course, you know, if you translate the Cherokee out, Cherokee language word for Christmas means the day that they shoot the fireworks. And so...
what is that word? I'm
not sure what that word is. I looked it up one time, but what I mean, it's kind of a long word. And I know some Cherokee, you know, you say, to greet a Cherokee, you say, Oseo, Salaki, Tohiju. No, hello, Cherokee, how are you? And the answer is Shoosh, see, I'm okay or fine. And now this Bartlesville here is in what used to be the Coiskui district of the Cherokee Nation. It was all called the Big District because one time it extended clear to the Hunters and Reed and Texas line west, and then as far south as the Creek Nation. However that boundary was, it's generally shown in the map, on an Oklahoma map. You know, you go along there, there's a straight line there, and you get down to about Pawnee, and there it kind of buckles up there a little bit. And then it runs straight on into about Tulsa there. Well, that was about the end of at least that was a strip line. See what I mean? That was a Cherokee strip line, or that would be that outlet end of it there.
Right. Who was your father?
Well, my father was J.H. Barber, second or junior. In other words, now this is what I know about the family. See, my grandfather was Dr. J.H. Barber. He lived at Cherryville, Kansas in his final years, and so I don't know if he had a daddy that was Joe H.
And was he a doctor?
Yeah, he was a medic in the Civil War and later became a doctor. See, he got most of his early training that way.
Did you ever talk about the Civil War, the stories?
Well, I never did know him. He died before I was born.
Yeah. Okay.
But my dad used to talk about it, and I've heard some other people talk about the Civil War. That is what I mean, the older people.
Yeah.
Well, what I mean, some older veterans. See, there were still Confederates and Union veterans around when I was a kid.
What are some of the stories you've heard about the Civil War?
Well, of course, now I've heard several stories about the Civil War. I do know that, you see, right in here, just above this mound out here west of Bartlesville, that Herb Scheller, did you ever know Herb? There was a sign painter around here.
I've heard the name.
Well, he'd been here for many years, and he said when he first came down from Kansas, about 1903, he said there was a fellow out there had just got that allotment out in what is now Oak Park, and just above that bridge there, you know, across Butler Creek.
Yeah.
And he said that he was plowing out there and found a bunch of arrowheads. And he said he knew that Herb was interested in that kind of stuff, and so he called him out there. And so he said, when he got a day off, he said they went out there. And he said that he had plowed in there, and he said this looked like a place, he said that they thought that they'd made Indian arrowheads out there because there was broken heads and there was good heads and various things there. And I said the way it sounded to me like, the way he described it being in a kind of half circle, it described to me like it looked like it had been a battle out there because there was bullets and there was arrowheads and various things. And so when he said that to me, I said, well, heck, that sounds more like a battle. I said, that sounded like wagons was in a circle there or something. You know what I mean? I didn't know how the circle was, but anyway, it was a kind of a half circle deal. And so I said, that sounded like a battle. And you know that over there on that side of it, over there north of that country club, you know how it kind of dips in down there. Well, I can see these people on a more or less high place there, seeing those other people coming in on them there, see it kind of dipping down from, and I was up here at one of the historical meetings, and one of the so-called experts was here, and he was, I think all he knew about is what he'd read in books or something. But anyway, I was telling him about, that couldn't have been, it couldn't have been the Civil War because the Indians all had guns by then. Well, we know for sure that they didn't have guns, that they had, you know what I mean, they had assortment of some of them had arrows and some of them had bullets, you know. And so I call that the Battle of Butler Creek. And there was an interview in a paper sometime that the uncle of a man that had the first brickyard here, or was supervisor at, he didn't own the brickyard, but he was a supervisor at the brickyard, and he was from Texas. And
What was his name?
I was trying to think of it. He's buried right up there in White Rose. I can take you to the grave right there. But Hunter, Colonel Hunter, J.W. Hunter, his uncle came here to visit around in the early years of the 1900s, and he told about he was with the Confederate troops that was in this engagement out here.
Who won the battle?
Well, that's a question there, I think, because, see, this was during that time when you've heard of the Opothiahola, and they were going to try to, you know, there was a whole bunch of various kinds of Indians, Cherokees and Creeks and so on, and they were trying to get with the northern troops, you know. And so they started that trek, you know, and they fought, see, they heard the Texas Confederates were coming, and so they feinted away west from where they were there around Okmulgee. And then they heard that Stanwhitey's Cherokees was coming from the east, and so they started to drift off north there. And the federal agents had told them that they'd be up there on that 50 miles between the verdigris and that Arkansas in there to try to guide them onward. And of course, you know how that would be. You know what I mean? 2 men in 50 miles or something like that. And
that's where they caught him up on the mound?
Well, that was part of what they did, they came up the Verdigris Valley, and then they came up this valley over here, see?
Caney Valley?
Yeah. And so, in other words, they was down there around Tulsa when they had their battle. They had a battle. They met the Confederates over, the Texas Confederates, the way I understand it, they met it over there around about where Stillwater is. Because, you see, they translate that out 2 ways. One of them is they say it was the Battle of Round Mountain, see? but they translate that out as round of the mountain, see. So that might have been anywhere, see.
Yeah.
So we don't know where that battle was actually fought. But there's a map showing some of the other supposed engagements that's written from the Union standpoint. See, in other words, you got, and that shows it, and shows them coming up this Caney Valley and up the Byrd Valley over here. Just anything to get. They got on up to Kansas and starved to death and froze to death on the way up. What I mean, this would be a cemetery through here if you knew where everybody died along here in that time, because hell, there's nothing to eat and nothing to wear, and you know what I mean. They was on the run, and the weather had turned snowy and ice and everything, and so what I mean, they starved and froze. That was in the fall of, well, it was along in November, December 1861. And you see, another thing that I had been working on here, and the way, I don't know whether it's ever been explained. I know most people don't know anything about the connection with the oil and the medicine business and things like that, but you see, there is a trade paper that has existed since 1871. In the early days, it was called the Oil, Paint, and Drug Reporter. In other words, the people, see, my folks were in the medicine business up at Cherryville there, that is the grandfather, and my daddy's older half-brothers. And my dad worked for the company some of the time. And in other words, they got their prices out of that Oil, Paint, and Drug Reporter. It was a weekly paper. Mm-hmm. It is still printed, by the way. It is called the Chemical Marketing Reporter today, and it's 112 years old now, or something like that. And it's it still carries the old P&D logo on the front page. You know what I mean? Oil, Paint, Chemical Market Reporter, and/or, you know what I'm trying to say. And see, Phillips Petroleum advertises their Borger chemicals in it, and it's not untoward for the National Zinc out here to have an ad in it. So, in other words, it has the prices, as I say, of drugs and anything practically in the chemical line. It's all in that agate type, that small type, you know, but you can get the price on. Well, if you wanted that issue I've got of it, about a couple of years old, if you wanted to get that, well, anything anise oil or mustard or sodium salicylate, aspirin, which is acetyl salicylic acid, you know what I mean, if you know the stuff. Well, all right, it had the stuff in there about the oil business and about the paint business and the drug business. Well, okay, my dad, see, now I went a couple of years ago down to the Oklahoma Historical Society at Oklahoma City, headquarters there, and I went in there to the Indian Archives Division. I believe that's down in the basement there, ain't it? Over on the south side, is it? And so I asked the clerk there, what's her name, Mary, oh, I got that, I don't know whether I showed you that ticket a while ago or not, but see, this is that. See, this is that.
Yeah.
Mary, what's her name there, Mary?
Irvin, E-R-V-I-N.
Yeah, she's one of the curators or whatever it is down there. And so I just walked in there and asked them for a list of Cherokee Nation oil prospectors. And so they trotted me out a bunch of stuff there. And the sense of it was that the Cherokee Nation had passed a law in December of 1883 concerning mineral exploration rights. And of course this was passed, I was reading somewhere else in the Oklahoma Geological Survey, one of the early books on that, printed by the state, early state work, and this guy told about a Dr. Faucett came over there, and of course in one of my writings I said, well, he tried to turn it on, but he went over to the Cherokee Council and made an arrangement with them to, he wanted to set a rig down there on Illinois River. He figured that at Allen Bluff, just outside, about 20 miles out of Tahlequah on the Illinois River there, and he figured that that would be a good place to drill, see. Well, of course, you see now there's some strings attached to this drilling. He was drilling with the council, see. But there was a thing in there that he had to make a report every quarter. And so apparently he didn't keep up his paperwork, and so they rescinded the bond and canceled the lease. And he had a similar deal going with an outfit with the Choctaws down there at Atoka. And he found a show of oil over there before he died, they said, on the way to St. Louis. And by the way, this paper that I'm talking about, this OP&D, used to have a St. Louis edition too.
It did?
Yeah. So, well, anyway, it was 5 years then, about 5 years, and there was a guy by the name of Edward Byrd. He asked for a lease. See, now this leasing law, the way it ran was that you had to get, it's just almost like the Corporation Commission today. You had to get a location approval from the treasurer's office at Tahlequah. And then if they gave you that, well, then you had to put a $5,000 performance bond up. And that had to have no less than 2 signatures on that and different lines. In other words, the typical one shows one guy with $2,500 worth of livestock and another one with $2,500 worth of merchandise. And see, there wasn't any land yet. It hadn't been allotted. Yeah. It was owned by everybody, so that wasn't a thing in it. But see, after he began to pay royalties as early as 1892, now there's duplicate receipts down there of him paying royalties to the Cherokee Nation as early as 1892 in January. And so, see, he'd been working from 1889 on this, 1890 on this lease. See what I mean? He finally made a riffle and see. Well, then, see, now that's 5 years ahead of this law. This well here that they say is the first commercial in Oklahoma. See. And the Nellie Johnstone and so forth and so on. And so another one's name that I found in that list there in 1893 and 1894 was Jacob Bartles. And Jake, see, in 1907, about a year before he died, well, he told about drilling a well up there about a mile east of where Dewey is now. I throw on that old cement road on Jack Shaler's place there. See, that cement road was in there afterward, but this was before there was any Dewey. And so they drilled up there, and he said they had to close it in on account of polluting the garden spot there because there was no sale for the oil. So, you see, the Department of Interior wasn't going to allow them to sell anything like that until they got this allotment done. And see, the Dawes Commission too was in here on that allotment. See, at first, why they said passed a law, a general law, saying that if an Indian would take allotment, why he'd be given 160 acres of land and he'd become a citizen of the United States, and they would present him an American flag to show that he was a citizen. And see, that wasn't very popular. In other words, you get, well, Boudinot over here at Bonita, he got his house burned down on account of that, advocating that. And this guy down there, and Joe Works down in the Chickasaw country, he got put in jail for talking about it. And the Creeks passed a law. In other words, they didn't want that allotment, see. Well, so after the Cherokees got into that business down there, well, that excited the Creeks next door. Well, in that time, too, up here at Neodesha, Kansas, just 60 miles north of here, well, they had that biggest field in the Southwest as far as an oil field. Guffey and Gailey had brought that in after a guy up there had found the oil. See, the thing about the oil business that most people don't know is that in those days, why, it's a whole lot like it is now. If a fellow finds gas out here, why, he can handle that himself, but if he is dealing with oil, see, to a great extent, and more so back there, you see, the price of oil was determined by Standard Oil. And in other words, the way my dad used to talk about it, well, he said, when I and Sinclair was drilling them wells up here near the Kansas line, he said, we were hoping to get gas, because if we did, well, we might be able to pipe a town there. But he said if we didn't, well, he said the oil, he said we'd just have to do, he said we might not even be able to handle that at all, might not even be able to sell a dime's worth of it. And so that was the way that deal was. Well, so the Creeks then, well, they got as I say, went to Neodesha, and they made a deal with the Cudahy Oil Company. Well, the Cudahy was an offshoot of the meat packing outfit, and of course they'd been in the oil business, lard oil and that kind of thing, lubricants made out of meat fat, so you had that. And well, you know, now I've worked in the machine shops and around, well, I worked at the National Zinc over there, you know, and I worked in the machine shop around there, and we used lard oil there for cutting. I can't remember whether it was brass or aluminum, but one of them would cut so much better if we used lard oil than any other kind of oil you could get. And then I know we had tempering oil there too, and I'm not sure what it was, but I think it was lard oil because it sounds more like it.
Now, what did it do for the aluminum or brass?
Well, it just made it easier to cut somehow. That is, it caused less friction, or maybe it's not as many chips or something. Maybe it made it come off in a curl, you know, rather than in the little flying away pieces. You know, you can grind a tool to make it do most anything. That is, if you dub it off a little bit, why, it's kind of blunted, you know, and so forth. And now I can't remember what we used that for, and I never used it very much. That's the reason why I don't. But I do know they talked about lard oil there, see. Well, anyhow, Cudahy, they made a deal with them to come down and supervise their exploration. And so they set up headquarters near the agency down there at Muskogee in 1894. And so then in in 96, fooled around there in 95. Now, this Harry Sinclair that we talk about, he worked in a drugstore there that was owned by his dad at Independence. He was trying to be a pharmacist, and he was about 4 months older than my dad. And so when they met, see what I mean, they was similar of age and everything, and they got along real fancy. And so 96, well, that would have been, he would have been about 20 years old. So just ahead of that, well, there'd been others trying to do it too, but they went over, and he thought that he was in kind of maybe a unique position because his Standard Oil was United States was after the Standard Oil on antitrust business or monopoly business.
Yeah.
And so he figured, well, it'd be somebody beside the Standard Oil Company would get a concession over there if anybody did. And so now this H.V. Foster that was here at Bartlesville, he hung around that drugstore. My dad always figured it was on account that his daddy was a banker there, and they probably had maybe an interest in the store, or they had a mortgage on it, or, you know, something like that. He never did know the details of it. But he said that Sinclair and a doctor's son from over at Fort Scott, and there was a guy that was later the police chief here in Bartlesville, and in Tulsa too. He graduated out of Bartlesville to the police chief in Tulsa, and he was done in down there in a kind of suspicious circumstance. But anyway, they went over and talked to the councilman over there to kind of feel them out before they would make any presentation before a special body, or their special meeting or anything, a regular meeting. And so he said that they got the sense out of it that they wasn't going to do anything about it unless they got approval from the Department of Interior, because they'd been getting along with them and they didn't want to do anything to upset the apple cart. Well, he said that they went back up to Kansas, and HV was talking to his uncle, and he said his uncle was a promoter. Ed Foster was a promoter and knew the Department of Interior people. And so I went up to Independence, and I read out that Southeast Kansas Tribune up there about that on microfilms at the library there. And I went over to Cofferdam and read the Journal out, and went to Muskogee and read the Phoenix out. And so, of course, you have the magnet here that we got from the Kansas Historical Society. See, the files here got, best I could get, they were either destroyed in a flood when paper was in another location, or in a fire that happened later. I know they wasn't there when I was at the Examiner. But anyway, we got that, and so in the time at Bartles, after Bartles was pretty successful up there on that, why they decided, well, a bunch of them would get in. And so now this Overlees and Keeler and Johnstone and various other names from all over the Cherokee Nation, Tahlequah and Nowata and Claremore, they have people that are identified, Judge whatchamacallit down there, and Senator so-and-so from somewhere. They were mostly in the business end of things, or in the merchant class, the politicals and the merchant class. And so there was 225 of those there's a whole list down there at Oklahoma State, took leases about 1896. And they took leases, and they were going to drill a well somewhere, and they called that company, as best as I can get to it, they called it according to what they, when the well came in here that the Cudahy had drilled for the Enterprise Oil and Gas Company, so they called that, they took these leases from the Cherokee Nation, and I think probably cross-leased each other, you know what I mean, cross-suretied, you know what I mean, I'll be a surety for you on your lease, and you'll be a surety for me on my lease, see. I imagine that's the way it was worked. And then when this well came in, they told about it in the Coalfield Journal. They said that the one that the Cudahy had drilled for the Enterprise Oil and Gas. And
when was Bartlesville established?
Well, now, at best that I can tell you, now there was two Bartlesvilles. The Bartlesville across the river, north of the river. Now that out east there, they keep talking about Bartlesville. That wasn't Bartlesville, that was Burnett Post Office. But I'm just taking this on the basis of post offices, see. Now the first post office up in this part of the country was called Little Verdigris, which was the name for the river. It came to the river in 1859. And then the next one that we run into is Burnett. And it was out there, it must have been east out there, because, they used to be the congressman had to approve the mail routes, and the law, what I'm trying to say, there's the listing, it shows how the mail route ran, the various places, and it mentions Barnett, and then, there's one part of it went off over toward Tahlequah, and the other went down about like 75 highway goes this after, But, anyway, then the next, that was Barnett Post Office. And Bartles apparently was out there. And, but what I mean, as far as that being Bartles, it wasn't Bartles, it was Barnett.
Who was Barnett?
Well, we don't know, but we think he was identified. We know that he was identified as being amongst the Delaware-connected traders, because in 1870, while there was an agent from the U.S. comes down, and he tells about.
And what about Mr. Carr and the grist mill?
Well, Mr. Carr and the gristman, now there's a story about that nobody knows except me, I don't suppose. But see, Carr and Bartles were both Easterners, you know, Bartles from New Jersey and Carr was from Saratoga, New York. And they had come out ahead of the Civil War. And see, they were living up around Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte they used to call it, as the war broke out. And so they gravitated toward the Indian company that was being formed there. And so that was the 6th Kansas, or well, what I mean, it wasn't called the 6th right then, but then it was later became that. And Carr and Bartles served in that same unit with those Wyandotte and Shawnee and Delaware Indians and so forth, the Union Army unit, see. And that unit took part in the sacking of Tahlequah down here. And they never said a damn word about that in any of their history, see, here. But I picked it up in the other, you know, in the running out these other branches of service and stuff. But see, he sold him that, now that grist mill, I think, and from what we can tell about it too, there was a fellow here by the name of Joe Sykes. He was a preacher, a Methodist preacher. And he told about, he had been in the Civil War veteran and all, and he told about buying provisions at a mill over there where that Bartles setup was, and we think that that was that little verdigris. Butler post office was right in there, see, because that, if you get down and check it out, well, you can walk across that little neck up there. It's only about 250 feet, and it wouldn't have been too much problem to put in a little dam below here, and then what you would have done, you would have put, you would have built a Cofferdam there, a little Cofferdam there while you were putting your equipment in, see. And then after you got that done, well, you'd go down here and fill and put a dam up to raise the river, see. And then, see, well, then it'd go through the sluice that was cut from one side of that U to the other, see, the top of the horseshoe there, see. That little piece in there.
Yeah.
And now that wheel in there, it laid laterally instead of vertically. You know, you see a mill wheel most of the time, and it's.
How big was that wheel?
I'm not sure how big a wheel it was, but anyway, it would have to be a commensurate size for whatever work they were doing. I'm not sure, but I do know. Well, Herb Scheller was telling me about that. He'd seen the thing before they got it all out of there and everything.
What happened to the stones that were?
Well, the millstones, I understand, are up there at Dewey, up there in the library at Dewey. And one of them, at least, or maybe both of them are. But, no, as I say now, in that, they got permission from the Osages over here. The Osages says, get back to that oil business there a minute ago. I don't want to just, in other words, but to see if it wasn't that I knew about this, well, I wouldn't be able to talk about it. But you see, the Osages got that permission from the government from April 8th, 1896. It was recognized in Washington, see, on that day. And in other words, they had the oil company up at Buffalo, New York, and it was supposed to be capitalized at $8 million, and so they sent, or $4 million, and they sent a manager down here by the name of Jim Glenn, that was one of the major stockholders in it, and he sat there at Pawhuska. And of course, you see, they moved in a drilling outfit there at a position just immediately south of the Kansas line, and about a mile east of where 99 Highway is over there now. And they set the rig there, and then the stuff hit the fan, so to speak. You see, the Cherokees weren't allowed to sell their oil outside of the territory, nor the Creeks. They both had oil, see. And so Senator Blair in Washington was in charge of the territorial committee. He began to get letters from both sides of both of the Indian and Oklahoma territories. See, the Osages was in Oklahoma territory, and the rest of them were in Indian territory. Well, he began to get letters, and he was figuring on having a congressional investigation as to why the Department of Interior and the Dawes Commission wouldn't allow these Indians over here in the Indian Territory to sell the oil that they already had found. And so, of course, when that happened, why, the Osages, too, they was tore up about it because there was nobody got any royalties up in the Oshea. They'd torn the countryside up there and, scattered oil and water and salt water over hell. And so they were mad about that, and then not only that were they mad about, but the fact that the Osage Council had just rubber stamped this thing without any hearings about whether it was going to damage anything or whether the people ought to have it or not. It was just rubber stamped. So they sent word to Glenn, to the manager out there. They sent it, the Eastern Director sent word to him to cool it down there. And he put out the word that they'd stopped exploration, that they found a show of oil, but not enough for commercial benefit. And so, see, that had the effect of blunting the proposed investigation. And so then, see, in the spring of '96, '97, the spring of '97, this outfit here, this Cherokee, Utanas-Cadogie, my dad used to call it Utanas-Salagi. See, Utanas-Cadogie was a big district, the way you say it in Cherokee. Utana is the big part, but Utanas-Salagi, Dad used to call this the big Cherokee country. He talked about that big Cherokee company. And he said there wasn't nobody could get to be a stockholder in that except that there had to be a Cherokee citizen. And so, well, anyhow, they came here and set up in the spring of '97 and drilled this well. And of course, they give the date of April 15th on it, in which it was finished. It was shot the 25th, and they plugged it up, and it stayed plugged until 1902. Until after the allotment had passed through the Cherokee Nation voting there. And see, Johnstone got that in 1903, got the patent or the title. See, if you get a paper from the government, it's called a patent, and if you get it from an individual or a company, it's called a title. And so he got the title for his daughter Nellie. And see, when the Chamber of Commerce did this Chamber of Commerce committee here several years in 1937. See, if you remember about 2 years ago or 3 that the Phillips, had this Anna Anderson well. They were telling about what a good well it had been, and it had saved the company and everything, see. Well, now, it wasn't exactly their first well, because the first well was out here at Noah Holland's well. They tell about that, too. But just suppose that we'd begin to talk about the Anna Anderson well here as doing something, see, and had just left out all record or mention of the Phillips Company, see. Well, you can see how that would be. In other words, they'd be hell raised from here to San Francisco, so to speak, and around the world because of that, see. But here, they come along here, see, and the Cudahy had drilled this thing, see, and had ownership through the sublease rights, see. And they come along here and they see the Cudahy had sold this well to the National Refining Company in 1907. And then from there, National in 1943, I think it was, they sold it to the Co-op Refining Company. And of course the well was about played out, and so they decided they would do it in, see. But at the time that thing was going on, they should have called that the National Refining Company #1 Nellie Johnstone, see, in 1937. In other words, whatever the rest of it was, see, in other words, you see, the National was the owner, and in other words, today now it went through the co-op, and it now belongs to the city of Bartlesville. So it should be called the city of Bartlesville #1 Nellie Johnstone, see, lease, see. And that's all there is to it. It's just, that would be if you went by the standard nomenclature of,
Yeah.
you know. But the Bartlesville, to get back to that, just before we wind that up, before that, I just wind up that oil thing there. See, now the Osages over there, after they drill this well here, why, the Osages, they offset over here about 2 miles northwest on Butler Creek, up there north of, about in there where I was talking about that Cherokee battle a while ago, about the Civil War battle. And up there on the Andrew Wilkie place, why, they sunk a well in the fall of '97, the early fall of '97, and they got a darn good well there, and they carried 1,100 barrels out of here to Kansas by mule wagon. They didn't have no railroad yet. You see, the railroad was 2 years away from 1899, was when it was put through 99. And just quick as they got the rails down here in August, why, they sent in 3 carloads of stuff to reopen that field out there in the Osage, and it's been an Osage field out there ever since that time. And in other words, that was the first commercial oil field in Oklahoma. That is what I mean. That was in Oklahoma territory even, you know. Yeah. And the thing is, you know Don Wilkie. Did you know Don? Big kind of heavy-set fella.
I knew Tony Wilkie.
Well, Tony was his boy.
Okay.
But Don, he was around here one time some years back, and he was wanting to know if I knew anything about that well out there, and he said he'd heard that they carried the oil out of there to Kansas by mule wagon. And I said, well, that sounds about right. And so, see, he was a cousin to the principal chief, Sylvester Tinker, over there. And I told him to go over there around the agency and see what he could find out about dates, and I would check, you know, on it a little bit. And so I got the information April 8th, 1896. Well, you see, that would be about 3 years before they had a railroad. So, in other words, anything that was done over there was from April 8th, 1896 commercial, see, and...
How much oil could they haul in a wagon? Or was it a barrel on a wagon, or what?
Well, now there's a picture here, and I'm not sure who's got it right now, but what I mean, the actual, but I think there's two rather smaller barrels on a wagon. And it's something like it's just a wood barrel, see, with a big bottom and a smaller top, and it's pulled by mules. It shows them crossing. See, there was a ferry down there right about where that kiddie park is there. Mm-hmm. Well, just right there near the well, you know, by that so-called well, so-called now the Johnstone and so forth. See, the ferry went right across there, and they should, when they're doing all this new work around here, they should mark that location too. Coy Ferry, they call it.
Is that a natural dam there?
No, I'm sure that's not a natural dam. Now, I don't know what they had there.
Was that the dam that Carr built up for the grist mill?
No. That was another dam. That was reworked since that. It's been reworked even since I was a kid around here. So,
but you said that they would put a Cofferdam to raise the water level for the grist mill.
No, what they did, see now, what a Cofferdam is, it's a temporary dam put in so the men can work, see, to keep out the water so men can work around.
Okay, I see.
It's kind of a crib or whatever you...
Okay, yeah. But then is that a natural dam there then?
Well, then, no, I don't think it is. They had to go down there and put some rocks in there, something to hold back the water, see, to raise the level, see, so it would go through this sluice up at the top, see.
Okay.
And, well, they talk about conservation and all that, see, well, today we could they could probably get an appreciable amount generate an appreciable amount of electricity right over there if they put a dam, put a little rebuild the darn thing. And what I think happened now, really, on that car business, I think that what happened was that, see, he'd come down here with another group, and they were going to set up a trading post, and they got burnt out, supposedly, and accused the Osages of it, and the Osages said they didn't do it, that they'd been scouts for the Army, see, and it was the other Indians that did it. And so what I think happened was, now, just suppose that we would be gone now for 5 years, like the Civil War was. Well, all right, you'd have that sluice up there, and see, it all growed up around there. Well, here you come walking down through there, or riding a horse down through there, and hell, all at once, well, you fall in something, see. Well, you get to looking at, well, here's been a sluice here. There's been a, you know what I mean? So they go over there and go to digging around and find out maybe that there's a part of a wheel left or something that they'd used ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And so they put the thing back together, see, and refurbish it, see, and they call it the car mill. Well, it was probably there, in other words, it was more than likely, because we do know about the trade up through here. See, the trade, the licensed trader through this part of the country was a fellow by the name of Joel Bryan. And this Joel Mays Bryan, the Mays County over here. See, Pryor, he's now that's Mays Bryan. Joel Mays Bryan, M-A-Y-E-S, not O'Brien, but Joel Mays Bryan. He's a member of the Masonic Lodge at Pryor. They say that they got a picture of him over there. He was one of the Bryans, at least, I guess. But that was what happened, in the Cherokee Nation early was that they come out here in 38 and 39, and they didn't, or they organized in 1839, adopted the Constitution and everything. But they didn't have much money to operate on, so they looked around, and those salt licks, or salt plants all up and down Grand River had been working pretty good, and so they just took those over, expropriated them. Mm-hmm. And so they leased them out to the other faces, see. Well, this Joel Bryan was from Georgia, and he got that in 1843. And of course, see, they had slave labor on that until the time of the Civil War. And of course, that was a thriving industry of the salt industry was. Mm-hmm. And of course, you see, in combination, they'd take salt to New Orleans and bring back molasses and rice and stuff, and then they'd bring it out here and swap it to the guys out on the frontier here for hides or walnut logs or whatever they had of value, And see, the Osages at that time were sitting right up here below, just above the Kansas line, and they never was in trouble with the Cherokees much until after the war began there. See what I mean?
The Battle of Claremont found.
Well, now, the Battle of Claremont, now,
is it Claremore or Claremont?
Well, now, here's the thing about it. You see, in French, it's Clermont. And you have it spelled 9 different ways. You got Claymore, C-L-A-Y-M-O-R-E, you got C-L-Y-M-O-R-E, you got Mount C-L-A-I-R-M-I-E-R. That was the post office, 1960. See, the first one was up here. This guy that had it, Jim Butler, he was a little verdigris post office. He was a brother to the United States agent down at Tahlequah. And he was the son of the first Interior Department agent. See, they had military agents up until 1849. Mm-hmm. And so then you had that, and you had 19, but see, George Butler, and by the way, the Butlers that I'm talking about, now we ought to have this somewhere in this thing. See, the Butler family, you know Butler County or Custer County?
Yeah.
Well, all right, the town of Butler, that's one of the brothers, Tom Butler. This was Jim Butler here, and that was Tom Butler down there, and he'd been a officer in the Confederate Army and been an officer in the Spanish War. And before that was opened down there. And then another one that the fellow ought to include in this, you know, there was 2 Lawtons in Oklahoma.
There were.
The first one was up here in Lawton Indian Territory, up here in the Cherokee Nation, just below Caney. And it was named that, see, the Spanish-American War had been, the Spanish-American War was on, and so the Indians liked Henry Lawton, that was down there in charge of the Indians at Fort Sill. You've probably seen his name down there, no doubt. Well, see, so they named they were on the, I've seen an early railroad map on this proposed route line that was supposed to go down here, see, and up there about where Dewey is, there was a post office there called Dennis, or what would mean a depot would be called Dennis, see. Well, after Dewey, supposed to have been a friend of Bartles, and after he took the Spanish Philippines, you know, Manila, Spanish War, well, they named that town of Dewey, took the Dennis name off it and called it Dewey. And of course on down through, you had, see, Hobson had attempted to sink a coal ship in the San Diego Harbor down there. And so he was a hero. So they called, where Ramona is, that was called Hobson. And then they had a naval officer called Fighting Bob Evans, that was later the admiral of the fleet. Evans was Vera, where Vera is, and what I mean, they used those military names for that right at the particular time, but then they changed most of them after.
How come they changed them?
Well, I guess they just, like it is today, you know, different politics or different,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, they called it the Hoover Dam and they changed it to the Boulder Dam or something, you remember?
Right.
And,
Now, who was Claremont?
well, Claremont is French, see? And if you say it in good French, you say Claremont. Claremont. Claremont is what it is. Well, of course, you see a French man saying that, and an Englishman hearing, see, he'd say, well, he's saying Claremont. See? It's just like this Canville. We had a trader through here with the name of Canville, but if you say it in good French, you say Conville. And so, in other words, what I'm trying to say, and so Claremont, see, is the way it translates out.
Where is this Claremont?
Well, that's the Mount Claremont Mound, see.
Where is it?
Down there, Claremont.
It is?
Yeah, you know how that is. You've been down through there, haven't you? Take a highway down there, like out of Collinsville to go to Claremore.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how you turn around down there and up and down. And it was probably the tallest hill there, is probably what it was. And, it couldn't have been that damn woman down there, somewhere down in there. I was telling her about Claremore and Claremore and Mount Claremere. And see, the postmaster was a fellow named Foreman. Coody's Bluff over here. See, this, as I say, this Butler here, he had the first post office, and that was in the later part of '59, and then in May of 1860, while these other places got a post office.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Coody's Bluff over there. That's just ahead of the Civil War. See, that's about a year before the Civil War began. And then but that's your Claremont, the College of Claremont. I'm not sure, but I think that where it is in southeast part of France. I believe Claremont is, well, what I mean, it's a well-known town in France, see. But You see, they spell it Clairmie or Mount Claremore. That's the way they spelt the name of the post office in 1860. And see, those post offices, they didn't last. They were just they lasted about a year. And see, the Scotch antecedents. There's one down here near where Skytook is, about where Candy joins Byrd. That was called Lannom Falls. And this postmaster up here got in the battle with that, got into a feud with that postmaster down that, and he killed that. This one, Butler killed this Parks down there. That was the postmaster for Lannom Falls. See, that Lanarkshire in Scotland is where Glasgow is. And as I mentioned, those Scotch Covenanters were fighting, you know, the religious wars there and political wars too. And so that's how we got.
What about the Reed family?
Well, now the Reed family, as far as I know now, there was a rather long little drink. See, when I knew them, why they lived right down here, you know.
Right down here on
Back over
Virginia?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And about in there back to the Cox Grocery, but of course the Cox Grocery was a later day thing. But when I first knew them, there wasn't nothing much down there except a couple of houses there. You know, Three Finger Brown, that was a bootlegger, he lived up, or a moonshiner, he lived up there a little ways from.
What was his name?
Three Finger Brown, they called him.
How come Three Fingers Brown? Three Fingers?
Yeah, he had three fingers.
Where did he make his moonshine?
Well, he was reported to make it in several places, but I don't know. I never did know much about it. I was just more or less a kid along about that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the way I understand it, Mr. Reed, that's the old man Reed, he worked part of the time for the railroad, and part of the time, I know it, he painted houses kind of on a moonlight basis, or on, you know what I mean, in his spare time.
What was his full name?
Oh,
Was it James?
I'm not certain about it.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not absolutely certain. Let me see if I can.
Well, that's okay.
Well, you see, he had Harvey Reed, was one of his boys, and there was Winnie Reed.
Winnie?
Yeah. And the little fella, I see him down there in town every once in a while.
I think Winnie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's retired from Phillips.
What was Mr. Reed like, the old man?
Well, he was a man, I'd say he was about your size, probably. He wasn't too tall, or you know what I mean. He was a nice-looking man, I always thought, and he kept himself up, you know, so that he looked presentable, and he was friendly. In other words, I know we'd be maybe sitting on the porch up there, and he'd come along up there, and he'd sit there and talk to Dad, you know, and I know. See, now that was another thing about how I learned about something about this oil business that most people don't know. One evening there, he come along there, and we was sitting out there on the porch, and one thing added to another, and so he said, well, he said that last painting job that he was doing, he probably wouldn't make. He didn't know how he was going to come out on it, but he wasn't going to necessarily go broke on it, but he wasn't going to make, in other words, he hadn't priced the price of paint had changed, see, and it hadn't been in the contract, see.
Yeah.
And so paint had raised, see, and so he was going to not make quite as much off of it. He'd make his labor, but he wasn't going to make it much on the paint. So Dad said, well, he said, it's always that way. He said, you know, he said, one time they sent me out to the shop there in Caravelle to get the reporter, and so they could make some prices with on some private label stuff they were making for somebody, taking bids, you know. And he said, I got to looking at that thing of paper I brought in, and he said, it was 3 to 4 months old, and he said, I didn't know whether they lost a penny or gained a penny, but he said, I figured it. He said, I figured it was all right because I had never heard any more about it. Well, you know, I was just sitting around there, a kid, you know, and everything. See, Independence Reporter, Independence Daily Reporter, that's the daily paper up there yet.
In Kansas.
Yeah. So I was sitting there and I got thinking, well, did that Independence, see, I knew that they'd had a medical school there at one time in Independence, see, in the very early time. It didn't last long, but I knew it had been there. So I figured, well, from knowing that it might have had, a paper might have carried the price of wholesale drugs in it for some reason, or you know what I mean. I didn't know that it was or anything. And so a few days later, while I was sitting there, and I asked Dad, I said, hey, I said, did that old Independence Reporter carry carry a price of wholesale drugs in there, some of them like chickens and eggs and hay and stuff? And he said, no. He said, I never saw it, but he said, what made you ask that kind of funny question? I said, well, I said, you was talking about that reporter the other evening here to Mr. Reed. And, oh, he said, I'll tell you what that was. He said, I hadn't thought about it in years, but he said, that was a trade paper we took. And he said, well, right now it would cost you about $175 a year to subscribe to it. But he said, that was a trade paper we took, and he said that we had to have all business in it, and the paint business, the drug business, and all the laws, and the news about it, and everything in there, prices and everything. And he said, I hadn't thought about it in some years, but he said, I got thinking about it. He said, I guess it subconsciously came to me when I was talking to Reed there the other evening, you know. And that's what made me drag it up. And so, you see, in other words, I learned there about that, see. Well, and you go, years later, you go, did you know that there was a paper by that name? You go to check it up, you get down here in the air. See, that's the publication, you know, a list of papers that are printed, you know, trade papers and daily and regular newspapers and all, and you find it in there. And so that's, I learned that through association with Mr. Reed.
The Lannom house.
It's set just a half a block right there, about 300 feet from where we're sitting here.
What, about Hickory and 14th?
Yeah, about 300 feet south there. Can you see that little windmill up there in the yard? There's a guy got a little windmill up there.
Yeah, right.
Well, now that's about where it was. Mm-hmm. See, at the height of that hill there.
Yeah.
And it was built by the same people, same architecture that the Frank Phillips mansion has over here.
Which was the largest?
Well, they were both the equivalent.
They were?
Yeah, 26-room mansions. Mm-hmm. And you see, now I have studied architecture. See, that was kind of one of my minor. In other words, you know, I've always had more or less of an interest in that kind of thing, and I know about a corbelled arch, and I know about, you know what I mean. Some of there's many terms in that I don't know, but there's plenty of. But see, this place faced north, and instead of that ugly overhanging porch that's over on the Frank Phillips mansion, it had an observation platform up there. And of course, you see, you could put up your parasol in the summer and sit up there and drink your mint julep and watch the city grow and so forth. And see, now the porte de cocher on the Phillips mansion has been filled in with steps and stuff, but a porte de cocher was the porte de cocher out here on this one was on the west side, in the same position as it is on that, and what I mean in relative to the building as the Frank Phillips place is over there. And so the porte cochere was the opening for the coach, in other words, translated. And so you see, your coach would drive up there, and you could get out and go on into the party without getting your hair wet, and so on and so forth. And in other words, it was just covered. And of course, it had pillars in front like it is over there, you know. But that's been filled in with stairs and stuff over there. They don't use no horses no much anymore.
Right. Who were the Lannoms?
Well, Mrs. Lannom was a Cherokee, and she was born down, or raised down there at Tahlequah, Wahila, they called it. And so Lannom, he was a Easterner. He come from, I think it was Tennessee, if I'm not sure, but Kentucky. Anyway, there was a horse farm back in there that they called Belmead, that, you know, had some famous animals there. And so, you see, Belmead is a French word, two words in French. Bel means pretty, and mead is prairie. Pretty prairie, it translates out. And so there's people, you know, that said, well, I knew Belmead. Well, all right, we've got downtown here, see, she's now retired, and I understand lives in a rest home over here, but I don't know which one. But anyway, her name was Maybelle Mead, see. So they knew Belmead all right, see. But
where did the Lannoms get their money? How'd they make it?
Well, it was you see this mile out here. See, now you're looking too at now this 14th Street was one time called Lannom Boulevard. That was the first boulevard in Bartlesville.
It was?
Yeah. But of course it never was officially that, but what I mean, that's what people called it. Because you see in the James Phillips Elementary that was a racetrack. They had a half-mile oval racetrack down there, quarter-horse track. And now, you see, the place that I live over here next door, perhaps it ought to go on that list of you know, they've got a list that's over 50 years old, the places are over 50 years old. Well now, see, when we moved here in 1926, why, they told us that this used to be the boarding house. And so, Cowan, let's see, what's the name, anyway, I haven't seen him for some time. He's way up in years. See, he's about 90 years old, getting about 90 years old now. But, I was trying to think of the name. But anyway, he told me when, just ahead of the World War I, that he was a carpenter here with his dad, and that they'd converted this house. There had been a long room in there that they had quite a long table in. And they'd converted it from the boarding house to 2 rooms there.
That was the boarding house for the Lannoms?
Well, no, it doesn't have any associated, it wasn't a Lannom place, but you see, it was kind of a concession. See, in other words, you went down there, maybe you was playing down there on the rodeo circuit or something, and you could come up here and eat, see, if you wanted to. Or have your own fixings, or however you done it. See, a lot of times people in those years, they have a big old covered wagon, you know, and they'd have a stove in there and all the equipment of home right there in that damn big old covered wagon, you know. And then they could travel around the countryside and perform, you know, or go to shows of various kinds and stuff. And they also now, right down below the school in that where it kind of flattens out in there. I had a paper out down in there when I was, see, that was before this addition was built in here. And so I had the paper out, and so one of my customers lived way off down there, almost toward Liza Creek. And I was down there, I saw him down there, and he was building a new house right over here, and he was going to move in, him and his brother-in-law, or father-in-law, was going to move in sometime right sudden like. And so I saw him down there, and he'd coming out and looked like he was going to get in the car, and he didn't get in the car, so I started running down there and waving. I figured, well, maybe he'd see me, you know. I was about a block and a half away from him. And so about then, well, I took a header and stumbled over, and so I got up, and so I went on down there. He said, well, did you hurt yourself a while ago? And I said, no. I said, well, he said, it seemed like it took you a long time to get up. I said, oh, I said, what I did, I said, there was a sign there, and I said, it looked like it said saloon on it. So I said, I'm digging off that dust and mud there. I said, did they have a saloon down here? And oh, he said, they never had a saloon down here, a legal one at least. He said, they made some movies down here one time. He said, that might have been left over, an old sign left over from one of them false front places. And so what they did, I guess, was make the movies down there, because this old boy, another old boy, was telling me about that it was his uncle, I believe it was. He said he had a job there for a while. He'd ride that fence. They put up a fence down there, and he'd ride the fence. He was armed and rode the fence to keep out the curious down there when they was making movies.
Huh. How come the Lannom house burned?
Well, we don't know, but we think that it was probably they thought afterward it was probably see, they got their gas from a private well. And they thought maybe that maybe something had went out, see, and somebody lit something. They wasn't sure. But my mother said, see, it happened the morning after Armistice Day in 1926. That'd be the 12th, the morning of the 12th of November. And see, in those days, why Armistice Day was a terror, you know, you celebrated. And, well, like we went over to the high school that morning, and then had a small meeting there in the auditorium, and then we went on and followed the band, the high school band, on up to the courthouse, and then joined with the ex-soldiers of various kinds. See, it was the Spanish War and Civil War at that time left, you know, a few of them, and the World War I boys and so forth. And we went and marched with them then on up to the Civic Center and had a program there. And after that was over, you see, long toward the early part of the afternoon, while they had a playoff game between Okmulgee and Bartlesville down in the stadium, and football game. And then they had, I had extra quarter or something, went to the picture show after that. So I got home about 6:30 or something. And so they was talking about, well, you know what I mean, there'd been band music and so on. And so they announced they was going to have that big parade. It was the first after-war spectacular there. They're going to have it during the Christmas season, and I was wondering how I was going to get to go to it, because there's going to be advanced prices on it. Mm-hmm. And so about, I guess it must have been 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning there. See, my mother got my dad up and got his breakfast and got him off to work at the Smelters. And they went to work on that half shift, see, and they worked just about a half a day, as they called it, and they paid him for a full day because it was hot, heavy, and fast work early in the morning, see. And so he went off to that, and so she went back and lay down, she said, and all at once she said something woke her up. She didn't know exactly what, but she said she heard some people talking loud, and she figured that was some drunks getting in from the dance, you know. They'd had a banquet down there and a dance at the Legion and stuff. And so she went then to she said she didn't pay no attention for a little bit, and she said it seemed like she heard some people screaming. And she said it was probably on account of the way the wind was, because part of the time it was coming pretty good from the southeast there. And so she said when she heard the people scream, why, she pulled up the blind and looked out, and that damn thing was on fire up there, that house that Lannom mansion was. Bellmead mansion, they called it. And so she ran to the telephone, said first that she got me up and kicked me in the hind end and told me to, you know what I mean, shook me kind of awake and told me to get all the clothes I had on and help the other children. See, I had two brothers and a sister was the youngest. Help them to get their clothes on and get everything they had, because we might not have a house in most any time. So, because that stuff was blowing pretty hard. Well, anyway, she said that she went and called the operator those days, you know, the telephone operator. It was before the days of this mechanical stuff. And the operator told her, well, they'd already had a call on it, and the truck was on its way. And so she said that about the time she got through the let down the phone, while she said she heard the clang, clang, clang bells, you know, on the horns and stuff, siren. And they had one with they had a bell on, like, you know what I mean, is it?
Yeah.
It was worked, the mechanical bell worked off the wheel, so you could throw the thing over and
Did they save into the house, or did it burn it?
No, there was, see, 2 blocks from, about 3 blocks from a water tap. And so by the time they got it hooked up, why, there wasn't no pressure, and besides that, why, it was too far gone.
Yeah.
And so that ruin sat up there for a long time, and see, in 1945, why, they started that, building those houses in there.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother Forrest, he just got back from the Marines. He wasn't, he was home on leave after being to Iwo Jima. And so he wanted something to do, and he got him a job helping him rough in the plumbing over there on those places.
Mm-hmm.
And spent most of his furlough here. And
Who was your mother?
well, my mother her original name was Sarah Fanny Betts. She was the daughter of a Englishman, Jesse Solomon Betts. He was born in London, had served in the English Navy. You know, you had to either go to the Navy or the Army, and he'd served in the English Navy, and he learned the use of instruments in the Navy, either in gunnery or in I don't know exactly, but anyway, he became a dry land surveyor for railroads. Mm-hmm. And see, my grandmother was a Pennsylvania Deutscher. Her name was Ickleston, and I rather think from the name and from the man she married, Holzer, I rather think it was probably toward the Swiss end of it, down in maybe the Black Woods there, or the
They're in Oberholzer? It's not
Over,
Oberholzer in Oklahoma City, is it?
well, no, I don't know. Well, that's Oberholzer, ain't it?
Yeah.
This is Oberholz.
Oh, okay. Oberholzer.
Or Oberholz.
Yeah.
Anyway, Emil Oberholz, he was a Civil War veteran, and he died of TB, and so she and her brother came west in an ox wagon. See, she had that 160-acre preferment on the homestead. See, her husband had been a war veteran, in other words.
Where was this?
Well, they landed up here near Ellsworth, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
About halfway into Kansas. Well, I mean, it's about the center of Kansas.
Yeah, okay.
And so she was born up there in a Bohemian community. And of course, you see, I learned part of that too because she knew a little of that stuff. And you see, it's almost the same as Polish and Czech. See, it's a Slavic tongue. And say, by the way, I furnished a lot of the information that went in that Oklahoma ethnic series, that
Yeah.
Polish book.
Mm-hmm.
And the Stanley Kazmierzak here, he was helping that the writer, and so I said, well, listen, I said, tell him to send me a manuscript of what he's figured on turning in. I said, I'll check it for what I know about the smelling business, see. And so I guess, you know, they had it in there at the original manuscript, they had it in there that they call that half shift out there because the people just worked half the time. But see, it was 7 days a week. I got that straightened out for them. It was a 7 day a week job, and it was that full-time job, except that they actually worked half the time, but they got paid for because of that early morning hours.
What did you do at the Smelters?
Well, I worked there. I was a kind of, looking back at it, see, I wasn't at that particular time, but looking back at it, see, I was just working there. But see, they sent me over there, and I worked a while in the electrical department. And then they put me in with the blacksmith for a little while. And then I was over there in the machine shop some. And then I was with the plumber up on the furnaces. And then I was with the plumber down with doing the rest of the work. You know, they had places where they like.
How come they built the Smelters here?
Well, there was lots of gas here in the early days.
That's the reason?
Mm-hmm.
When did they build it here?
Well, they started in here in 1906 to building it. And see, the first smelter was, they got it down about halfway, and a big windstorm came and blowed it all out, cyclone or a tornado. And so they went ahead and was working on that, and they announced there was going to be another smelter, see, and that was, see, the Lanyon Star. Now, Lanyon, and he was associated with that Neodesha. See, when they began to get natural gas in Kansas up there on the edge of Missouri, see, they began to put a lot of plants in there. And he was hooked up with that Neodesha plant, see. And then he came and promoted this, Lanyon was, and a fellow by the name of Star, they called it Lanyon Star Company. And so that was the #1 plant. Well, as I say, it got about halfway built and they loaded down. And then the American Smelling and Refining Company, that's where you see it still today, ASARCO, see? Well, in other words, they came here and they opened up what they called the Bartlesville Zinc Company. They didn't, that was the #2 plant, see, as they called it. And then in 1907, outfit came in here and opened up the #3, or the National Zinc Company, they called it. And so that was, see, they got their first, see, the product, the zinc that the zinc is called spelter. And so they got their first speller off just about the time of statehood, just ahead of the statehood.
Out where Gus Vanetcha's store used to be,
Mm-hmm.
that was a large Pole community. What's the name of that community? What's that called out there?
Well, you see, now, they had Smelter Town, and they had Mosquito Row and Fly Point, and Ragtown, and Pruneville, and see, they were generally descriptive of what was there.
Yeah, what about Pruneville?
Well, Pruneville, see, they said, well, they've made cheap whiskey over there, cheap drinking stuff, out of prunes, see, and so, of course, that's supposedly over on that, as you're going out there to your mom's place, you know, where you make that thread needle curve down there. Well, it's on this side of the Katy track, see, it's on this 14th side of the Katy track, or that on the hill there where that old drive-in theater used to be in there and everything. That was Pruneville. And of course, Then you see you had, in the early days, what they called it Ragtown, because there was a bunch of tents out there. You've seen that picture, haven't you? I've shown the tents out there and a little old building or two and stuff. And, well, I see they called them Ragtowns because it was tents, see.
Yeah.
And then you had everything it used to be. They had in the early city directories here, well, they had Bartlesville, and then people who live in Smelter Town. So if you check them, you'll find that it'll say Smelter
Now,
Town.
Smelter Town, what they call Frog Hollow?
No, Frog Hollow is this little ditch down here where, you know what I mean, where it's kind of just before you go up the hill there, up the track there. See?
Yeah, right.
Well, that was Frog Hollow, and there used to be about 40 houses set in there. And there was a two-story down in there that they used for a hotel and had church in it and so forth. And see this stuff on this side of the line, see, but it was the cheap gas from the Osage is what brought the smelters here.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't hardly enough development on the Cherokee side in that they didn't have anything to amount to anything in that line. See, we lived out there in 1922 and long in there. We lived out there where Preston Gaddis lives out there. You know where that is out there, 20th and Southview. Mm-hmm. Well, on that hill there, yep. Call it Lucky Shooter Hill there. And see, we thought when we moved out there, why we'd get some natural gas there, because see, we'd had flat rate gas over here at the smelter. Mm-hmm. And so when we moved out there, why, the fellow said, well, he said he'd sure like to hook it up, but he said he just didn't have enough gas there most of the time even to run the damned engine. He said, especially if it began to get cool weather. And of course, you see, he'd had to get permission from the Corporation Commission, and we'd have had to file this, and I don't know, a whole bunch of papers, if you know what I mean. You'd had to go through to do that, and so it was too much problem.
Well,
is there anything else you can think of would be that you'd like to know about? There's a lot of things that.
Oh, not right now. I'd like to do another session though sometime.
Okay. There's a lot of things. I know we've covered quite a bit of space there. Now, what we might do here, I think I mentioned that I ran for governor. Did I mention that I ran for governor and so on and so forth? Well, now, I started to tell you a while ago about in '79, that first annual Will Rogers thing, you know. So I kept hearing on the radio, and see, as I say, ahead of that time, why I'd picked up stuff out of the newspapers that was similar to what Will Rogers was saying, that was written in 1890 and 1870, and you know what I mean back there. And I'd heard my dad say a bunch of stuff like that, see. He's pretty sharp on a lot of things, and quite a humorist too. Used to have one, he'd say, you know, a gun is dangerous, with neither lock, stock, nor barrel. Well, how's that, Dad? Well, a man once beat his son to death with a ramrod. So, in other words, see the kind of a non sequitur jokes and stuff. And so I had extracted a bunch of that out of those old newspapers. And so I had given a talk about Will Rogers and how he had picked up so much of his humor from various other points, see. It's like today Red Skelton or Bob Hope, see, they have writers that do that work for them, and then they choose what they think will work good and mouth it, see. So I had given this several places, well, and I'd heard that on the radio, see, they were talking about they're still accepting nominations for should be in from the 10th of November, I don't know, or 10th of May or something. And it wasn't, but about that time, well, I got a damn letter here, blank, see, that they'd sent out, somebody by the name of Murphy. And I said, no. Somebody by the name of Martin. That's what it was. Somebody by the name of Martin had heard me give this talk a couple of places, one place or another, see. And so I filled it in, sent it down there. And you see this outfit that presents that Oklahoma out there about at Sand Springs there, out there at Discovery Land they call it.
Yeah.
Well, see, they in the Department of Tourism was sponsoring this thing. And so I sent in my, what they asked me on that, credentials, or you know what I mean, what experiences I'd had and so on and so forth. So heck, I got an invitation back to come to the ceremonies and as a nominee and everything. And I got down there and I took Freddie Zeb and a couple of others here with me on that. And so, you know, I was interested in, down there at the site, I was interested in, well, Carl Albert was there and all the, several people that I'd known in a political way, you know, and in a newspaper way. See, I used to be a news correspondent through here and various things. And so I tried to find out if there was another nominee down there beside myself, see. And I couldn't, it was the most peculiar run thing I ever saw in my life, because most of the thing like that, why, they get up and say, well, we've got so many beauty contest entries here, and we've got, now these are the semi-finalists and so on and so forth, and like that, see. But they never said a damn word. They got up and said that Carl Albert had won it. And there wasn't another, as far as I could tell, there wasn't another nominee down there except I and Carl. And I asked him about that. Oh, there was a lot of it, but see what I'm trying to say, my investigation just, so what I think happened was that they couldn't figure out, see, I was the only, maybe I was the only one that answered the damn thing. And, well, you know what I mean, it sounded all right to me. And maybe I was the only one that answered it, see, and so they said, well, we can't give it to that guy because he's not wide enough out to suit us, see what I mean? Or probably wider than what they've got, but what I mean, see, what I'm trying to say is, see, now like that 78, see, well, I was out there, there's a guy coming here through the United Press, and he was from New York, and he said he's on the way, he said he's trying to do the same kind of thing, or kind of like this guy on, you know, they had that, Columbia Broadcast had that guy on the road, you know, and he'd interview this.
Charles Perrault.
Yeah. And he's trying to do a thing like that, see, a whole lot, except just in the media, in the writing way. And so he saw as he come over the hill out here on the No Other Road, he said he saw that thing and said Hog Shooter Creek on there. So he said he went down there and began to ask about Hog Shooter Creek, and he said somebody sent me, gave him my name, told him to come and see me about that. And so he took my picture. I was standing in a snowstorm, and a few weeks later, not too long afterward, maybe 2 weeks or, you know, maybe up to a month or something, party called me and said, Joe, I said, I found a picture of you. And I said, where's that? And they said, well, I said, you know, he said, you know who this is. So some people we knew when they lived way back over here when I was just a kid, and they lived over there on Virginia. And we lived on 11th Street. And then she said, got a picture of you. And I said, well, what was you doing? Digging out an old trunk at the time we lived over there? And no, I said, this is a more recent picture of you. And I said, well, where did you get it? And she said, well, it come from Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I said, Cheyenne, Wyoming? And yeah, I said, you're standing in a snowstorm, it looks like. And said, oh, I said, yeah. I said, that was that guy that was here a couple of weeks ago. And so he started out his piece. He said, well, they don't shoot hogs here anymore, and so on. But see, that hog shooter was a Cherokee.
Yeah.
See, you know what I mean? They, how was it? I was trying to think of that the other day here. During the war there, Civil War, where they'd always when they read the roster, you know, checking up on the, wasn't you in the Army a little bit?
Right.
Well, you know how they check the roll, you know, everybody, here, sir, you know what I mean? And so they'd wind up and say, okay, turnabout, roll over and kick up, I believe was the name of the Cherokee's name. See, was roll about, turn over and kick up, I believe was the way it was. Anyway, that was the way it, and roll about, turn over and kick up, or however that was. But you see, there's a lot of little kind of humor in there, like for instance, the town has passed ordinance to curb Willie Street. Well, what's Willie been up to lately? See, and
Well,